So we're live today on LinkedIn Somnia in afternoon edition. I have Nigel Bristow. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes,
Okay. How's your week going so far?
very well, thanks.
Okay. So you've written a book on feedback. How many books have you written?
Oh, I think four.
Four. And what motivated you to sort of write a book on feedback?
Well, I'd been a consultant for several large companies for some years, and it was a topic that seemed to be important to them. And over the years, in helping people deal with feedback, I developed some tools and some concepts that proved to be very useful. And so I decided it would make sense for me to put it in a book so that more people might have access to the tools.
Hey, Jessica.
Hello.
All right, you're on. Good. Perfect
It's actually
timing.
LaDonna.
Oh, LaDonna. Okay. Sorry, I emailed to Jessica, so that's why
Right.
Okay, LaDonna, thank you for coming on. So you have a few people, and you're gonna see comments coming in. So appreciate you. Do you mind giving a brief intro of yourself, LaDonna?
Sure. I have been a public school teacher. I've been the assistant director at the Capital Area School Development Association in New York, and I've more recently been working with Nigel and the Bristow Leadership Group on book Finding the Gift and Feedback for Educators.
I mean, so what made you sort of get into feedback? Because feedback is just a very interesting topic.
When I first started teaching, I realized that it really would have helped me to understand this concept of feedback when I started, reading Nigel's original book for Where's the Gift for the business world. I really started thinking, if I had known this when I first started teaching, it would have made such a difference when I was having my principal come in and evaluate me. If I had have thought of it more on like, how can I really use this information to help me grow and progress as a teacher, instead of thinking, I just need to do well and get a good grade on this, kind of, like we think about for our students, just so I can pass it off and get done with it, But if I had really looked for all this feedback as a way to help me to learn and develop, I think it just would have made a huge difference.
Yeah. So Nigel, what has been your growth with feedback? Because you wrote the book on feedback, but typically it's not like, hey, you were always good at taking feedback. So how has your journey with feedback? Where did it start?
Well, it probably started in the cradle, but I didn't really start thinking about it until I got to graduate school in the United States. And
how old were you then?
I was 28.
Okay.
So I had done an undergraduate degree in economics. I'd run a small training company in South Africa for several years. And then I decided to come and attend graduate school in the States. And during the first semester, we did an interpersonal skills class. And this particular class was on the topic of feedback. And we were all asked to give each other feedback. So we went around the room and each of us gave our fellow students one at a time feedback on one thing they were doing well and one thing they were doing poorly. And one of the participants in the class told me, Nigel, the problem with you is you love the sound of your own voice. And he certainly got my attention. And initially, in my head at least, I was very defensive. Now, I do have reasonable emotional intelligence, so I didn't punch him or attack him verbally. But in my head, I was saying, no, that's not fair. That's not true. But, it stuck with me. The fact that it caused some pain probably was a blessing, because I continued to think about that feedback for some time. I went home, I told my wife about it, and she didn't console me at all. Her response was, and that feedback surprises you? Anyway, the pain in that feedback got my attention, and it led to some significant change in my behavior in the class. I'd been very competitive. If the professor asked a question, I was the first to respond. And I pulled back as a result of the feedback. And what I discovered was that the less I spoke, the more I listened. And the more I listened, the more I learned. And some of the quietest people in the class were some of the smartest. And so that put me on a new trajectory around feedback. But it took about 10, 12 years from that point before I wrote the book.
Okay. So that was obviously a very interesting experience for you. So LaDonna, how was your
Yes.
experience with feedback? So you had, what was your, like, what memory stands out for you?
So one of my biggest ones on feedback is when I mentioned earlier about principals giving evaluations. And when I first started teaching, I had several evaluations from my principal that were, very positive and everything is great. And then all of a sudden I had an evaluation where the principal said I didn't think there was any educational value in that lesson. And I was just like blown away, like, what are you even talking about, And so, we talk about a lot of times feedback is not always given in the most positive or helpful manner. And so, of course, I just got angry and upset, and how could she possibly say this? Looking back in hindsight, if I had been thinking more in the mindset of trying to see what I can learn from this, even though it wasn't given in the best light, I could have realized that my first year of teaching, kind of the teacher's advice would be to put on a dog and pony show. They would say, just kind of really do stuff that you normally wouldn't do, try to make it really flashy and exciting when you're teaching a lesson. And so I think I tried to do a lesson that wasn't what I would normally have done. And in the process, it didn't come off very well. I mean, I think there still was educational value in it, obviously. I think she went a little too far in saying that. But it just, if I had been thinking like, okay, yeah, I think I wasn't on the right track with this lesson, and what can I learn? And if I had really asked her, like, what could I do better? And, where did I miss the mark? And what, asked her for her feedback and ideas and how I could do well on, not only on my, lessons for my evaluation, but on everything, in my just lessons in general and my teaching. Instead of seeing it as, like I said before, just, am I going to get a good score on this so that I can, do well in my job and continue to work there and things like that. If I had said, okay, what can I learn from this? And I really want, when someone's coming in to evaluate me, to be able to get some kind of feedback that's helpful to me.
Yeah, no. And I just want to thank the audience. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Kelsey. Nice to see. Thank you, Manik. Someone asked why I do have a mask on. I'm actually in a friend's office. I lost power, so I'm not in my bedroom. So sorry about that, everyone. So Nigel, so you had this big experience, right? Where you're like kind of shocked, right? Your wife gives you that feedback, right? We have your initial reaction. Now you got your initial emotions. Now what would you sort of do next?
Well, part of that was something I said earlier, which was I started to contribute less in class. I didn't speak up as quickly. I participated a little bit less. Now, that doesn't mean I stopped participating. That would have been an overreaction and a very unproductive reaction. But learning just to pull back a little bit, learning to let other people speak first and not feel the need to be the first one out of the gate, that really was very helpful to me. And so, I think from there, after graduate school, I became a consultant and a management trainer, and getting feedback from one's clients was a key, I believe, to my success. Always taking the feedback as something of value, always assuming that their motive was to benefit me in some way, always assuming that I would learn something from that feedback that would help me, that, regardless of how it was delivered, there was some merit to the feedback. And I needed to listen, I needed to investigate. And often people aren't very articulate because when they begin the feedback conversation, they're nervous about how the other person's going to respond. And when people are nervous, they don't think they're best. They say the wrong things, they put their foot in their mouth, and being willing to cut people some slack and recognize that giving feedback is a stressful thing. And when people take the risk to do it, we need to be patient with them. We need to recognize they won't always be articulate. They won't always use the right words. They may sometimes say some things that on the surface appear to be offensive, but we need to recognize that all feedback conversations contain some discomfort, and hence people aren't going to use the best words, and we need to look past that and see what we can learn. Anyway, it's been a long journey, and I can't say that after 30 plus years that I never sort of feel pain when people give me feedback. And there's always going to be pain. The question is, can you get past it? Do you have the capability to exercise some emotional control to the point, if you can get through the first 60 seconds of a tough feedback conversation and do it the first 60 seconds well, you'll probably be okay. And so learning to sort of coach yourself through those first crucial 60 seconds is very important.
Yeah. No, I think, what do you have to add to that, LaDonna?
I think that's, a really important thing. Like Nigel said, we just get so defensive, when people give us a lot of this feedback, especially when it's not given in the most positive and uplifting way. So if we can just kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, let me really try to understand what this person is saying and where they're coming from, and not get defensive. It just makes the whole conversation go so much better. You can try to understand what the other person is really trying to get across to you. Make sure you see if there's something you've done inadvertently that might have caused any problems, and yeah, just really makes it so everybody's feeling understood, and you can see what you can learn.
Yeah. So you mentioned that even after taking feedback for so long and writing a book on feedback, you still get some discomfort. So Nigel, how is that discomfort compared to what you earlier on in your career versus now?
Well, the discomfort is less. The more important thing, though, is I know how to work through the discomfort and get to the other side. And if I might just share something that I think will be helpful to the participants in this podcast. There are three parts to the brain that are engaged when you receive feedback. There's something called the amygdala, and the amygdala processes all signals that come into your brain through your eyes, your ears, etc., etc. And the amygdala decides whether or not it's a threat. The amygdala, if it determines that what's coming in is a threat, and by the way, the amygdala doesn't differentiate well between psychological threat and physical threat. And so it communicates that there's a threat to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus activates the release of hormones and chemicals into your bloodstream, things like adrenaline, that prime you for the fight or flight response. Your heart rate increases, your breathing gets a little more rapid, your muscles tense, and blood is taken away from the non-essential organs. And so your stomach, your digestive system loses blood so that your arms and your lungs and heart can get more blood. And unfortunately, your brain is also deprived of a little bit of blood. And they estimate that you lose about 15 points, IQ points, when your amygdala says, hey, that sets off the alarm and says there's a threat. Now, here's the critical piece. The amygdala and the hypothalamus are part of the subconscious system, and they get activated before your prefrontal cortex even has had a chance to process the information. In other words, if someone calls you a jerk, your prefrontal cortex hasn't registered it, but your amygdala has registered it as a threat and has already instructed the hypothalamus to start pumping these hormones. So the way I like to think of it is the amygdala is like your watchdog, right? And if it starts barking into the dark, it activates the emergency response team. That floods your system with these chemicals. Your prefrontal cortex is deprived of oxygen because blood flows are changed. And that's when you respond in stupid ways. That's when you say stupid things, you get defensive, you say things that are counterproductive, that aren't helpful to your ability to learn and benefit from the feedback. And if we can just cut ourselves some slack and recognize that that initial reaction that we have to criticism, and of course, feedback also includes praise, but the one that seems to get us the most is the criticism. If we just cut ourselves some slack and recognize that these emotions that we are feeling are natural, and we just got to talk ourselves out of that initial negative defensive reaction. And we've also got to acknowledge that when we're giving someone else some feedback and they respond in a way that's defensive or stupid, we need to cut them some slack and recognize that that discomfort, that initial reaction is probably their subconscious that's taken over. The amygdala has hijacked the brain, and you've got to give them some space to be able to deal with that emotion before they can deal with you at a rational level and learn from your feedback. And so just understanding that this is normal helps us both in giving feedback and receiving it.
No, thank you. That's very important, and it kind of makes sense that the brain is wired a certain way, and so, there are certain ways that it functions. Sometimes for our benefit, but sometimes it's working against us. So, LaDonna, you as a teacher,
Yes.
right? How has feedback really improved your ability to teach and really impact children?
Well, I think, once we realize the importance of feedback, right, we receive feedback to help us to become better in our teaching. That can help us, with our students, but we can also teach them. We're giving students feedback all the time, right? And so we need to teach them these steps also, how to receive feedback. Don't get defensive that we're trying to help you. If we learn these skills and we find the importance, we need to pass them on. They're not just going to automatically be good at receiving feedback and giving feedback and all these skills that have taken, us as adults a long time to learn about. So we need to just focus on that when we give them feedback, talk about it with them, talk about how it can help them to improve. In the book, we kind of link it to a video game. When you are playing a video game, your character dies, and you're not saying like, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid that my character died and it's horrible. You think, oh, well, I learned something. I know that when I play this game, I need to do such and such to get to the next level, and you learn and progress. And so it's the same kind of concept that, when teachers give them feedback, that we're doing it to help them to become better, because we know, how smart they are and how wonderful, and we want them to do the best that they can. And so once they kind of start to learn those concepts, and there's some activities we talk about in the book that they can that you can do with your students to help them. And I think that it's a learning process.
Yeah. So, and Delay asked, does counting internally before responding to feedback work? And is it, because you have this 60 seconds, right, that your brain's going to react how it wants to react. Now, you can't stay there for 60 seconds. What tips would you have for dealing with the initial first 60 seconds? And both of you are free to answer this.
Okay. Some of it involves breathing. It's been medically proven that if you take a deep, measured breath and exhale slowly, that can slow the heart rate down. That can start to reverse some of these initial emotional reactions that you have. Now, as you say, you can't just sit dumbfounded for 60 seconds. You've got to respond. And so sometimes just having an automatic response can give you time. So for example, coaching yourself to say something like, I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Or thank you for bringing this to my attention. I was in the service at one time, and you learn what to do when you're ambushed. You don't want to be thinking about what you're going to say, what you're going to do. You drop. Dropping is the absolute first thing you got to do. You don't think about it. You then roll, because where you drop, they know where you are. But if you roll, you're getting out of where they saw you drop. They're not sure where you are. If you teach yourself similar tactics when it comes to feedback, and maybe sometimes your brain thinks you have been ambushed when you're giving feedback. For example, in a meeting, when someone gives you feedback in a meeting, that really does feel like an ambush. And you've got to have some words that you've primed yourself to say that get you past those first 60 seconds. So thank you for bringing this to my attention. Could you elaborate? Could you tell me more? That gets you started. And then there's some self-coaching questions that you ask yourself. Because the human brain, this prefrontal cortex of ours, when we ask it difficult questions, it automatically says to the rest of the system, the automatic system that's hijacked some of the blood from your brain or the oxygen from your brain, it says, hey, I've got a tough question to answer. I need some of that oxygen back. And so when you ask yourself thought-provoking questions, such as, I wonder what she's trying to tell me. What can I learn from this? What am I missing? What is she seeing that I'm missing? And the moment we start asking ourselves those questions, it calms the watchdog down. And the blood flows start to change. Our prefrontal cortex starts to override the amygdala, and we get through those first 60 seconds. And of course, there are other things, taking a time out. Sometimes that may be the best thing. And although I've never done this, sometimes a person might say, I'm not ready to deal with this right now. Could we continue the conversation after lunch or tomorrow morning when I'm in a better position? And sometimes it's legitimate to say that. If you're under the gun, let's say you're trying to meet a deadline and someone springs something on you, you're defensive partly because it feels like an ambush, but also you're defensive because you've got a deadline, you're under stress, and so asking for a timeout is perfectly legitimate. Now, science also tells us that splashing your face with water, cold water, can quickly calm that emotional reaction. But of course, that's not an option we have at work or most any other place. So hopefully the strategies I've already shared will help some people.
No, I think those are some phenomenal strategies. Now, LaDonna, how, as a teacher, how does it differ? Do you change your strategies on giving feedback depending on the age of the child? Like, hey, this is how you give elementary school. Middle school, you're allowed to go this far. Or do you have like a consistent formula that you sort of apply?
There's generally a consistent formula, but obviously with younger children, you're going to do things a little bit differently than you do with older students. One of the surprising things that we've discovered is that, younger children, you want to give lots of praise to all children, right? But it needs to be specific. If you're just saying, oh, great job, you did so great. Younger kids, they're going to take that and say, oh, good, I did great, and I'll keep trying. But as students get older, they've had a lot of this, and if you're just not giving any specific praise, which is feedback on things that they've done, they just discard it. They think, oh, well, teachers just say that all the time, or parents or whoever, and I'm just not going to pay any attention to it. Now, if you give specific praise or feedback on things that they've done on an essay or whatever the assignment might be, then they can say, and especially if you add things that they could do better on, then they say, okay, they gave me some specific praise, but they also said some things that I could improve on. So they aren't just saying this mindlessly, right? That the teacher actually took the time to think about, what I did well, what I could improve on, and then they see it as really beneficial. Whereas if you're just saying, oh, great job, you did good, and they don't even listen to it as they get older, which is kind of surprising. With younger children, it's a little different. So you can still do a little bit of that, even though it's still better to always be specific and things that they, had done well and things they can improve on.
Yeah, I've read this one thing, and let me know if you've heard of it. Is that when you're sort of giving feedback to children, you're not supposed to sort of say you're so smart, and you're supposed to kind
Right.
of praise them on their efforts, because a lot of people who've been told smart later, they sort of get by and they actually struggle. So can you sort of elaborate on that, on your experience with that?
Right. Yeah, I've read research on that as well. That if you just keep telling them, "Oh, you're so smart," it's kind of the same thing as saying, "Great job, good job." It's nothing specific, right? And so they don't see the merit in it after a while. They just don't really think about it. So they need to just. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there for a second.
Yeah.
I'm trying to read the things and look at what we're saying.
Yeah.
So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no, it was just about praising children for being smart. It's a common thing that a lot of people think they're doing sort of a benefit to they're doing it for it, but it sort of does disservice in the long run.
Right. So you just need to be very specific in the praise and the things that you're saying to students. Yeah, like you said, they just if you aren't, then they just discard it. If they're just saying, "No, you're smart," it doesn't tell you what are you good at, right? And it doesn't tell you what you can do to improve. And it kind of makes you think there's a limit on what you can do, right? You're already smart, and so why should you try hard? And some kids it comes naturally to, but there's always things that they can do to improve and to get better. But if they just keep getting this idea, of I'm smart, then when things are hard for them, if they're trying to learn a new skill, like say they want to pick up an instrument or something like that, and it's difficult, it's something they've never done before. Well, they're not used to that, right? Because they've just been told you're smart, and if they automatically try something and they're not good at it, they get that feedback of, "Oh, I just can't do this, and it's too hard." But if instead you're telling them you did really well, on your scales in the music class this week. So it's a specific thing, or you could use some help on your fingering. So then they're getting feedback specifically on what things that they are doing well, things that they can improve, and not just a blanket statement of you're smart and so you just don't need to try or push yourself or try to do better.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Nigel, looks like you want to add some stuff.
Yeah. So that particular research suggests that one of the biggest problems with telling someone they're smart is it gets them into the risk-averse mode when it comes to learning. And so the teacher thinks I'm smart, but if I do this hard thing and fail, the teacher will no longer think I'm smart. And so I need to preserve this image that I'm smart. And so they don't try new things. They don't do difficult things. They become risk-averse. And although that research was first done with children, I firmly believe that it applies in the workplace to adults as well. That they need to get feedback, as LaDonna said, on the process, that their hard effort, the things they're doing, even though it doesn't deliver the results. If people did 10 out of 10 things correctly that the company teaches them to do to get a sale, but they didn't get the sale, you don't criticize them for not getting the sale. You praise them for the things that they did, and you reinforce the fact that not every time you do those things you're going to get a sale, but if you keep doing these things, the sales in due course will take care of themselves. And so praising effort and process is often much more important than praising results.
Okay. So feedback, for whatever reason you mentioned before, seems to have, hey, it's always something criticism. So LaDonna brought up some great points that, hey, be specific when you're giving feedback. What are some other mistakes that people make when they're actually praising someone in a way that sort of, it doesn't do them, it sounds good, but it really doesn't do them, it's not helpful for their future?
Go ahead, LaDonna.
Sorry. I was just going to say, I think it's just the same things we've talked about before. Like if you just give these general statements, I've heard stories of, people whose bosses give them general, feedback. Like, "Oh, you're doing great, you're doing fine," and then one day they're getting let go, and they're like, "Well, I have no idea," and there because all they've heard is you're doing great, you're doing fine, and they weren't really given the feedback that they need to learn and grow and progress and become better in the job. So it kind of gives them a disservice.
Yeah. And for me, when you're giving, and I use the term reinforcing feedback, although I'll often use the word praise or compliment interchangeably with that. And I use the term reinforcing because when you're giving praise, what you're trying to do is reinforce certain behavior so that the person continues to do it or continues along a certain path that's going to lead to their success. And there are two parts to the praise that are critical. One is to talk specifically about what they did. The second is to be specific about the impact of what they did. Because sometimes someone may have worked really hard in the presentation. You might say, hey, I really enjoyed that presentation. Good job. But they may, in their own mind, say, it really wasn't worth the effort. So yeah, some people liked it, etc., but it really didn't have the impact that I wanted. But if you can talk about the impact, so if I don't just say, hey, I enjoyed it, good job, I say, I really learned something from your presentation today. This is what I learned, and it's going to help me do this differently in the future. And I'm sure a lot of other people took away similar learnings from your presentation. Thanks. That leaves the person saying, wow, I had the exact impact I wanted. It really was worth the effort. And so action and impact both need to be specifically stated. Another thing to keep in mind around praise or reinforcing feedback is if you combine it with criticism, it doesn't count as praise. So if you say, hey, good presentation, but... And some managers years ago, and hopefully it doesn't happen anymore, they were actually taught to deliver criticism in between two slices of praise. And, those managers had the idea, well, I'm giving two pieces of praise for every piece of criticism. That's about the right ratio. And by the way, the ratio should be something 60, 70%, 80% praise to 20, 30% criticism. But when we use praise in combination with criticism, basically we tell the other person, number one, I don't think you're adult enough to take criticism. So I've got to soften it up for you. You're a child. Number two, I'm not honest with you. I'm just saying this stuff because you can't handle the truth. So I'm going to soften you up. I actually had one supervisor in the training workshop say, every time, she said, my boss often gives me praise in the form of a sandwich, and that's the only time I ever get praise from him. And now every time he gives me praise, I feel he's buttering me up to fry me. And so we really need to be careful not to combine praise with criticism. If we want to give praise, give it unadulterated and leave it at that. Maybe a week later, you're going to give them some feedback that'll help them improve. But if you're going to give praise, don't mess it up by adding suggestions for improvement.
So now let's say you're giving the criticism, and both of you can answer this, and they don't take it well. What are some next steps of how you said it, and you said it in a nice way, and they don't take it well? What would you advise someone to do next?
Okay, so in the steps for delivering criticism, and the term that I use there is redirecting feedback. It's information about someone's behavior that helps them change their future behavior in a way that's going to help them better achieve their goals. And earlier I said we need to normalize discomfort. And so even when a conversation goes well and the person has heard you, at the end, they may still have the criticism ringing in their ears. They may still be feeling some pain. And so, we talk about the last two steps of a redirecting feedback conversation is next steps, which is to say, let's put a plan together that helps you address that. And part of that, putting a plan together, is letting the person know something about their strengths that could help them address the concern. And so an example that I like to use is a statistician gives a presentation, bores everyone to death with just all these dry statistics. However, this individual began the conversation by telling a personal story about their family and how you can't generalize from the specific to a broad population, etc. And it was a compelling story. Everyone was engaged, but after the first 5 minutes, the presenter lost everyone. Now, you've got some decisions to make here. If you're going to tell him, you really need to cut down on the statistics. My inclination would be, you get to the point, you don't beat around the bush and starting by telling them what a great story they told. You tell them what your concern is, that they lost the audience because there were too many statistics that weren't grounded in real life examples and applications. So you talk about that. And then when you get to the next steps phase, it's okay to then do a little praising, because you didn't use the praise to soften the blow. Your praise isn't going to be interpreted as, oh, he just said that to soften the blow. So what you say is, now I know this hill that I've suggested you climb seems a little daunting, but I want to tell you that you already have what it takes to get up that hill. Remember that story you told at the beginning of the presentation? I saw people on the edge of their seats when you told that story. And what I would love to see you do is figure out more stories like that to come into the rest of your presentation. So that's one way of handling it. Now, part of giving good feedback is knowing your audience and knowing how they respond to feedback, etc. Someone once said that a hint to the wise is sufficient. And some people are good at reading between the lines. I've got to say most people aren't. And so I prefer not to ever drop hints. But let me give you an example of how you might give praise in this particular case. So you tell the person, and so you don't deliver any criticism. You say, hey, George, that story you told about your family at the beginning of the presentation, it was an amazing story. It had people on the edge of their seats. People were really engaged, and they really understood the message of your story and how it relates to statistics. I would love to see you tell more stories in your presentations to make all your statistics come alive for people, and leave it at that. And if you know the person and you know that they don't have to be beaten with a stick to understand that you have a concern, that kind of praise and say, hey, do more of it, will get you perhaps further than pointing out that he lost the audience for the last 50 minutes of his presentation. Anyway, sorry, maybe a little lengthy response to your question.
No, I mean, it was interesting. LaDonna, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just add, we were talking about teaching students to learn about receiving feedback. And when giving them feedback, it's really important to remember, especially for younger kids, but really with all of them, not to give too much at one time. So, maybe with a really small child, you might just want to focus on one skill. And then, with a little bit older kids, maybe 2 or 3 things. But if you overwhelm them and bombard them with too many at once, then they don't even know where to start. And they're just thinking, just everything I did must have been horrible. But just focusing on a few things at a time. I think is helpful with children. And then also one thing we were talking about, principals giving evaluations. If they can preface that when they do it with, I know you're a great teacher and I know you're trying really hard to do your best for the students, and I just want to be able to help you, to give you some ideas of things that you could do to become even better. I think that can kind of put the teachers at ease. It can help them to see, okay, we're on the same team, and this is really just to help me become better as a teacher and to become better for the students.
What do you feel like a lot of teachers sort of get wrong about feedback?
I think just with people and just like people in general, that a lot of times you get defensive. You just don't even pay attention to a lot of the feedback. You're getting it from your administrators, parents, even students, other teachers. And so I think if you're not really understanding that feedback can help you to understand that, first of all, where that person's coming from, and maybe there's something that you can do that, we've talked about, even sometimes if you don't think that the feedback is helpful or positive or good, sometimes there are still things that you can learn from it. Oh, maybe I did something that this person didn't understand why I did it. And so just, first of all, just knowing that feedback is important, trying to learn what you can from every situation, to have better connections with people, to really just to ask them, okay, what are you really trying to get across to me, and what can I do to make things better?
Yeah. So are there times when, and this is for either one of you, and both of you can answer, are there times when you should not listen to a person's feedback because it's just not constructive and it's not really damaging, or even in those situations you could still take some things away?
Could I just, are you asking, are there sometimes when you just shouldn't give feedback?
No, sure, you shouldn't listen. Well, I'll ask you that next. But when you shouldn't listen to a specific person's feedback.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So I'm going to say no. You always listen. Now, that doesn't mean you have to believe them. It doesn't mean you have to do what they tell you, but you've always got to listen, because our prejudices can sometimes cause us to discard feedback that could be incredibly valuable. So, you don't have to be a genius to see when I'm doing something stupid. A person who has far fewer IQ points than me, because they're standing a little distance from me and they can see me clearly, will see things that I don't see. And so don't discard the feedback because you think they don't like you, or they're not as smart as you, or they haven't got as much experience as you. Everyone has an insight that could bless your life, and you've got to listen to them. Now, sometimes what I'll say is, if after honestly listening to them, you have some doubts about what they're telling you, that you think it would be counterproductive to implement it, then seek a second and maybe even a third opinion. And again, how you seek that second opinion is important. If you say to someone, I can't believe what Sally said to me, you won't believe it. And what do you think? And of course, the person's going to, try to avoid giving you some honest feedback because of the way they see you've reacted to Sally's feedback. On the other hand, if you say, Sally gave me some feedback and it's really got me thinking and I'm concerned about it, and I'd like your opinion on how I should handle this feedback. Here's what Sally told me. What do you think? And if the person is someone you can trust, who's honest with you, and they say, that's Sally's issue, I'd ignore it. Then maybe you have the right to ignore it. On the other hand, you may discover that your good friend thinks or sees things very similarly to the way Sally sees them, and you need to change.
Okay.
So that's my thought on it.
Okay. No, I love your thoughts. Donna, anything to add to that?
So I actually had an experience kind of going along with what Nigel was saying when I was talking about my principal who had given me a really poor evaluation, and I went and talked to a seasoned teacher and asked her, what she thought. And she told me, this is when I was teaching kindergarten, so the younger kids, and she said, "Oh, I just teach, the letter or sound and for the lesson, which is really short." So I had thought, "Oh, I can't possibly do that. It's not a long enough lesson for the evaluation. It's supposed to be half an hour, and I just have to do something different than I normally do," and tried to plan this big lesson. But to hear her say that, and then she had said that the principal had pointed out a little error that she had made, and I was like, "Oh, didn't that worry you?" And this was like, as a brand new teacher, you think everything. Oh no, am I going to lose my job or what's going on here? And she said, "No, I just I know that the principal is trying to help me, and I know that." That I'll do better next time because of it. And it just kind of helped me to like refocus on, okay, I don't need to put on this dog and pony show that I'd heard a lot of the teachers say. I just, I've talked to somebody that I really trust, and she's given me this advice, this feedback that can help me to learn from this experience and to learn from experiences in the future as well, to try to, and another thing is also sometimes you want to, I could have gone to her before this evaluation, right? Or gone to the principal and asked for suggestions and feedback of things that I could try to do if I was worried about, I wasn't sure what to do in this particular lesson because I did the things that I usually did were long enough because the younger students' attention span is so short. But then I came to realize the principal knew all of this, right? So just getting some of the feedback beforehand, if you're concerned about things, and then taking, like Nigel said, talking to people you trust, seeing what feedback I've gotten should I keep, which things should I say, okay, maybe this was just somebody's opinion. And so there's just a lot of things to take into consideration.
Okay. Now, let's go into the scenario of, is there a time you should not give feedback to a person?
Well, let's say timing. So, for example, if I'm driving and my kid is at the wheel, I'm in the passenger seat and my kid is driving, and they do something stupid and they have an accident. Immediately giving them feedback on what they did wrong might not be helpful. Finding out how they are and how they're feeling might be the place to start. And when their adrenaline has stopped pumping, and that may be an hour later or it may be the next day, then perhaps you can start having a conversation about the behavior that led to the accident. If a person has messed up and they know they messed up, you don't have to rub it in. You can just let them go with their discomfort, and you can accept the fact that they know they messed up, they're going to learn from it. I don't need to add or throw salt in the wounds at this point. But in a general sense, the one time you don't give feedback is when it's something they can't change. And so the things I'd suggest steering clear of is when clearly they were not in control of the situation, when it's something like an innate characteristic, an innate trait, a personality thing. Those are not things that change easily, and within the time frame that we expect change to happen in an organization on the annual performance improvement cycle. And so steering clear of things that people don't control or can't change, that's most critical. And then, as I said, the other issue is timing. Sometimes delaying the feedback is going to be more helpful than giving it immediately.
Yeah, so any specific instances when you shouldn't give feedback to a student? Like, how would that change for student-wise?
I think it would be pretty much the same for a student. You can tell if a student's really upset about something. They've gotten an done an assignment and they're just like, oh, I just don't know how to do it, and they're really upset. And that's a time where you could maybe try to talk up their things that they did do well in the assignment and the things that you've seen that they've progressed with over time. Now, after a while, if they've had a chance to calm down a little bit, and you can see that maybe you could then try to bring in some points that they could improve on for the next time. But I wouldn't, like Nigel said, I wouldn't do it if they're obviously already upset and thinking like, oh, I just was so stupid, I couldn't do this. That's not the time to kind of pile more on them and make them think that they just can't do it.
If I can just elaborate, in other words, there's sometimes when instead of giving feedback, you should give support. And that
Right.
might be saying, hey, what can I do to help right now? And leave it at that.
So, are there better mediums for giving feedback? Like, let's say you can meet them in person, you can do a phone call or email. Are there better mediums for feedback? And how does feedback change depending on the medium?
One of the tools that I used with my clients and organizations is a tool where a supervisor can ask the members of his or her team how they like to be given feedback. And for example, I had an employee when I had my consulting firm who said, I want to first get the feedback in writing, because when it's face-to-face, I get all emotional, I say stupid things. I want to get it in writing, I want to get a heads up, and then after I've had some time to process it, then I want the face-to-face conversation. Now, 95% of the population is the opposite. Hey, if you have a concern, I don't want a heads up in writing. I want to talk about it now and get it over with. Otherwise, I'm not going to sleep until we have the conversation. So part of it is knowing your people and having conversations with them about feedback. And so a team leader or a supervisor saying, hey, one of the things that makes us successful as a team is feedback. I need to give you feedback sometimes, and you need to understand that I only give it to you to help you achieve your goals and the goals of the team. Similarly, I need your feedback. And so what I'd like to do today is have a conversation about how we're going to give each other feedback. And I'm going to ask you how you prefer to get feedback, and I'm going to tell you how I want you to give me feedback. And you enter into some understanding and recognize that not everyone wants it the same way. That said, face-to-face allows you to see the person's feedback to your feedback, right? Their feedback might be a facial expression, it might be a tear in the corner of their eye, all of those things that you miss when you try to use other ways of delivering the feedback.
Yeah, LaDonna, what do you want to add to that?
I don't really have anything to add to that. I think Nigel, did a great job.
Yeah. So you mentioned someone has a tear in their eye. So what do? You give some feedback, and now someone has a tear in their eye. Now it's definitely a specific, unique circumstance. It's elevated to a different degree. What would you sort of do in that situation?
I think, if we're talking about a student, can we talk about before, sometimes especially the younger kids might get really emotional if you're giving them I'm giving them this advice. Just, just have them take a deep breath, let them to calm down a little bit, and then just say, you could ask them, do you know why I'm giving you these ideas of things that you can do better? And hopefully if you've had these conversations already, they would say, oh, I know it's to help me improve and to do better, and say, I care about you, and I know that you can do well, and I know that you can do more than this, and that's why I'm giving you some suggestions of things that you could try to do better next time, because I know that you can. And just trying to be very positive, supportive, help them to kind of come along to that conclusion as you go along. I think that's really helpful with children.
Okay, thank you. And Nigel, what do you have to add to that?
Fortunately, I haven't had to deal with it too often.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if I can build on what LaDonna said, it's saying, I understand that this is difficult for you to hear, and feedback of this nature is hard for people to hear. And then reassuring them about your intent. I'm not doing this to hurt you or to suggest that your job's in jeopardy. I'm here because I believe you have potential to succeed in this team, and I think this will help you. So being clear about your intent, what it is not. Sometimes, you might say to the person, I can see that this feedback is difficult for you. Tell me about what you're thinking and feeling right now. Give them a chance to verbalize what they're feeling. Sometimes it might be taking a time out. So again, understanding your people, their personalities, might lead you in slightly different directions. I think one of my questions would be, what's causing the tear, right? Do they feel that they have hurt someone that cares about them, someone that they trust? Sometimes getting a feedback from an enemy will cause far fewer tears than getting feedback from a loved one, because there's more to lose and you're worried about the relationship. And anyway, the tear could be caused by a lot of different things, and sometimes it's best just to ask them, tell me what's going through your mind right now.
No, thank you. Do you experience a lot of students crying, LaDonna? Like crying or getting really angry to the point where it's like, or do you, or
No, I don't think so. I think most of them, like, you would really start this whole process, and we didn't really kind of draw it out in the book, and teaching them the process of receiving feedback, and teaching them why we're doing it, and teaching them that it's not an attack on you, and it's something that is to help you to learn and grow and progress, do better in your work. And so you really start this out as the whole process, keeping it safe, making them feel like, oh, it's all right. This is not like a personal attack on me. This is just something that we're all getting. All the students are getting the same, different types of feedback that can help them in their work. And so really, if you start the process that way, making them feel safe, making them helping them understand the process, then that really alleviates a lot of that. You still might, get kids who might get upset every once in a while. But in general, they're going to do so much better if you just really explain, do some lessons on practicing the receiving feedback, and just really helping them to learn about it.
Okay. So let's start to wrap up. I just want to thank, Daniel Hall and Delay, Kelsey, Keith Goins, just everybody who's been watching and just supporting it through the comments. I want to give a special shout out to Glenn Cherop right here. Glenn on the screen. He's the one that made this possible. He suggested the episode. He's the reason why I read your book, and it was very enlightening. So, I really want to thank you. Just, if any of you have any questions regarding, and if you want to buy the book, I would highly recommend it. Now, any final thoughts? I'll let you start, Nigel, and I'll let LaDonna close it.
My final thought is to reframe the feedback conversation, and particularly when you're receiving it. The value of the feedback that you get depends less on the ability of others to give it than it does on our ability to receive it. And if we just adopt the mindset that all feedback is information, that we have the power to identify, understand, interpret, and then decide how to respond to it. Just because I say treat all feedback as a gift does not mean that you have to use all feedback, but you always have to be open to it, and that's enough said.
Okay, thank you. And LaDonna?
I would, agree with everything Nigel said, and just say, just remember, every time someone's talking to you, it's a lot of it's feedback, right? From the students, from the teachers, from your coworkers, from your administrators. And so just always taking the time to really listen to what people are saying, to kind of go through the steps that for receiving feedback. Make sure you're really understanding people, and I think it helps you in your personal life, in your career, and everything that you're doing.
No, thank you so much. Just want to sort of wrap up the show. I'm glad we got it working. Sorry, it started a little late, but things worked out. It's just a little hectic, just doing things. Like I said, I lost power, so I lost power yesterday, so I had to have a backup plan, because I don't like moving these things around, and I know you guys planned this ahead of time. So for anybody watching the show, thank you for watching Linked Insomnia. If you want to support the show, patreon.com/NoDegree. If you want to sort of reach out to them, feel free to contact me, and I'll give you their contact info. I would highly encourage you to read the book. Use code NoDegree on the link earlier in the comments. If you can't find that link, please message me. And I want to thank Nigel and LaDonna for the wonderful feedback, the wonderful topics regarding feedback, and I look forward to having you back on again.
Thanks, Sinead. It was an honor, and I appreciate the questions. It really helped the conversation flow.
I appreciated every single answer that both of you gave.